All right, introduction. Thank you. It's lovely to see you. I think we'll leave the door open for a bit there, and obviously people may join. And I know some people are joining online as well. So there are teas, coffees, water. If anybody needs, feel free to come and get that. So thank you for coming today. I've got my little clicker here, but I am a bit of a walker, so you might, see me walking up and down with my clicker. So after that introduction, really, I suppose what I'd like to say is that this is the lecture, as you will have seen advertised, so the pandemic and beyond. It's reflections, recovery and resilience, the 3 R's, but in a different way. And we're thinking, obviously, the focus is on children and young people. I can talk about adults' health, I can talk about children's health, I can talk about social work, but I'm going to bring that all in to really focus on children and people's mental health. I've been nursing, I totted it up the other day and it's quite scary. And it's all right for me to say rather than Googling it. It's nearly 40 years, that I've actually been nursing, and that was like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. So in various different guises. So that's a long haul. And I'm still working on the wards on the front line as an adult nurse. I don't know where I managed to fit that in, but somewhere I managed to fit that in. And I work at NHS CAMS on a Monday in a family work clinic. So I'm systemically trained. If you want to be a family therapist, you got to master's level. I'm the next one down, so I got to intermediate level. Maybe the master's at some point, I'll say. I haven't got time for all of that. So I bring all of that, knowledge and experience as well. And as was already said in my introduction, I do lead on 2 courses at the university, the foundation degree in child and adolescent mental health and the BSc top-up as well. So if any of you are interested or got any questions about all of that, any of that, we will have some time at the end to ask you. Okay, so you're with me for about an hour. As I say, I'll leave some time at the end for questions, or we'll be straight into our plans for the session, if that's okay. I tested this earlier. Hang on. It's gone. Oh, No, I have a problem with the. I've tried that. I tried it before. It's Emily. But then we go down. Hey, that was okay. So if we go to it's frozen. I'm going.
I can hear it from the end.
Honestly, it did work. So I think I just like to ask you a little bit about food. So I'm guessing by a lot of people's lanyards, and I think this is the first group that came in, that a lot of you are students in the college as such, yeah? And from what I gather, I'm just sort of nodding heads and things now, there are some people that are on access courses, which I think is the group in, I don't know, do a wave or something, I don't know, whatever, yeah, access courses, and then there's people on early years, I think, maybe early years, right, okay. A bit of theatre, health and social care, right, okay. Any other courses that I've missed out? Counselling, oh, amazing. No, yes? Oh, right, counselling, brilliant. Sorry, thinking about the clicker, did you get any?
No, I think the whole system's very fine.
Oh, my God. As soon as you start talking about COVID, something goes wrong, isn't it? Like, you know, so, yeah. Okay, so counselling, gosh, that's amazing. So, what course is that in counselling? Sorry, just someone.
Foundation degree.
Wow. Any other courses that I missed out? Yes.
I'm a staff member, I work in student stuff.
Okay.
I'm also trained to do
Oh, that's amazing. Right, okay. Fantastic. Play therapy. Right. Brilliant. Right, okay. Gosh, I mean, you'll see when we get into the presentation, there is a section that almost thinks about our lens that we're viewing through, yeah? So I won't go into the presentation because I'll ruin it for you, but there is the first bit about thinking about the lens that we're actually viewing through. So that gives me an idea about where you're thinking of. Now, I know there are probably some people, I know there's some people who used to be at the college, perhaps they're now at the university as such, and then maybe other people with different backgrounds. So, yeah, it's interesting to have. Oh, yeah, it's, yeah, and I've just got to wait when they signed out so I can get the. Oh, he's ruining it. I'm just going No! Don't, you're looking at it all. Oh, gosh. Do you know what? The fire alarm hasn't gone off either, has it? I'm waiting for this fire alarm. I mean, that will be it in a minute. We'll just get going. And then the fire alarm. Right, I'm thinking now that they are. I hope I'm not going to mess it up. But hey, right, okay. Normality has resumed. Right, okay. So that was a bit of padding there, right by Denisse Levermore. So let's get straight on into the lecture because we're already a few minutes in. Forgive me if I keep looking at my phone. Obviously, I'm just looking at the clock. So that is what the lecture is about. Aims. So our aims and again, I've split it into the 3 R's. Reflect definitely is a separate section, which we'll talk about. And I throw a lot of stats and things within there for us to discuss more about. Recovery and resilience tends to blend a little bit, as you can imagine. And we do obviously think about resilience as a separate feature as well, because in order to recover, we need to think about resilience. Those two things are intrinsically linked in order to think about, coping. Sorry, I'll have to do a sweep, don't I? You're watching So those are the sort of plans for the session. And as I say, we'll leave about 5-10 minutes at the end for some questions. The other thing I think is important for me to highlight here is when I do go into reflections, which that's what I'll start with, is I really try to balance it with the positive and the negative impacts. And some of you may be thinking, were there any positive impacts? Obviously, we're thinking about children, people's mental health and their relationships as well. And there were, you may be surprised by positive impacts of the pandemic. So it's important that I'm giving you a balance view as well, which is obviously my job as an academic. Yeah? So this is the bit when I was talking the model of social graces. Some of you are nodding, right, brilliant, right, okay, so that will be the counsellors in the room. Yes, right, okay. So it's a model that we use in family therapy, and we teach this as well at our university within our courses. And it's a really helpful model to be thinking about our differences, what's different about us, how we can think about differences, and also what joins us together. And here I thought it'd be nice to start with something like this because it helps us to think about the lens that we use to view the world, the lens that we're using, and obviously there may be a heap of different things within our social graces. So it is graces, numerous G's, numerous R's, numerous A's. It's an acronym that looks at, if you can't see all of that, it will look at, I'm going to explain all of it, gender, geography, race, religion, age, ability, etc., going all the way through the graces. So I haven't put the whole of the G's, R's, A's, but you can see it is an acronym. All of those. And some of those are flexible. I know John Burnham, who actually is a very charismatic character, if you across any webinars or anything of him online. He taught me through my family therapy training, and he's a really lovely guy, so knowledgeable. And he developed this model. So when you think about your own lens and your own social graces, I mean, I could put numerous ones on there, but I just sort of started with my social graces. And when I was reading this again the other night, I was thinking, it's interesting what you start with. And I seem to have started with, my children will kill me, I seem to have started with the fact that I'm a nurse, you know, children and adult lecturer, woman, mother, sister, daughter, white UK working class, able-bodied. So I don't know. I mean, I wasn't looking at anything in particular. It's just what I went with. So I am curious, as I always am, about, you know, my professional background being most important to me. So yeah, that is an interesting take on that. But maybe it's because I'm doing a lecture that came first to the lecture rather that came first to the front of my mind. So this is the lens that I will be using to sort of talk about the pandemic. So much as I'm aiming to give you a balanced view, it's important that we remember that's the perspective that I'm coming from. And some of you will be very different and have very different experiences. So this is where I throw a heap of sort of statistics. I'm going to stand here because I can read it up here rather than reading it on there as such. So some of the statistics that I'm going to share with you, again, I'm trying to get that balance of positive and negative as such. And this is focused solely on the mental health of children and young people. So as you can imagine, okay, what we know is in general terms, the rates of mental health difficulties for children and people since the pandemic have risen sharply. Yeah, I mean, that is without date. So some of the stats that are on here, probable mental health disorders have increased since 2017, and we'll talk about that date in a moment. And it's interesting the way they've split it into ages. 6 to 16-year-olds from 1 in 9 to 1 in 6. 17 to 19-year-olds, so that's a shorter age span, much higher age span, 1 in 10. Which is being 1 in 6 in general, between sort of, you know, 6 to 19, sort of. Okay. And I thought this was an interesting stat as well, where it says the rates in both of those age groups have remained similar between 2020 and 21. So, you know, that was our sort of, you know, second year really of the pandemic, and then coming out of it a little bit, you know, which is interesting to think those rates were stable. Now, all of these stats, obviously, there is still research ongoing. It's so early days, so I've tried to get the most up-to-date research as I can possible. But as you can imagine, we are still going through this. So research is still going on. So bear in mind those things will change. The interesting thing I thought as well was it takes this since 2017. Now, this was way pre-pandemic. That was Dreamworld, or say, like, you know, 2017, that was way before. So yeah, so it's interesting they took it from 2017. I think that was just the last time stats were taken around mental health difficulties for children. So going on to the next little bit there, you know, 39.2% of 6 to 16-year-olds experience deterioration. However, 21.8% had experienced improvement. So it's important to get that balanced view and to think about why that is and what was happening, especially thinking about lockdown and lockdowns. Right? 17 to 23-year-olds, 52.5%, so a higher amount experienced deterioration. 15.2% of those people experienced improvement. So it's a bit doom and gloomy, but also there is a hopefulness there as well, that there was some that actually experienced improvement. And as I say, it's interesting to think about why. The other thing I think that's interesting is the rates for the higher age range. If you see 17 to 23-year-olds, and that's also interesting, they go up to 23, whether you class a 23-year-old as child and adolescent mental health. I don't know. It's interesting because a lot of services will go up to 24 now. You know, they encompass young people. That's right. You know, young adults. So 52.5 experience deterioration. You have to think about the other things that are happening in that young person's life. Transition, stress from exams or not exams, what's going to happen, life changes, new jobs, no jobs, etc., etc. So stress as a whole would be larger. Do you see what I mean? So that number will be higher. not just due to perhaps the pandemic. Okay. The other interesting stat, and I mean, honestly, we could stats out for the whole hour, like, you know, but I've tried to really condense as much as we can here, the ones that you may find really more interesting. Eating disorders. Now, I know from my work in CAMS, I work in in CAMS in a family work clinic, and as is not primarily eating disorders tends to be within a separate family therapy unit as such. But I know they have had to employ way more people, but way more people, like, you know, and it has increased, I don't even know, triple-fold, double-fold, whatever. Huge amount of referrals in for eating disorders. My service is in Warwickshire, so I don't work in Worcestershire, Warwickshire, so it's a bit different. So as you can see there, the stats will agree with that. Proportion of children and people with possible eating disorders increased again. Last stat was 2017, 6.7 to 13% in 11 to 16-year-olds, 44.6 to 58.2 in 17 to 19-year-olds. So again, the higher age ranges were hit. But we're talking about 11-year-olds with eating disorders as well, which is quite a sad reflection, isn't it? And when we think about some of this, it's interesting to think about how anxiety is, because a lot of, you know, the things that we're talking about is anxiety, huge amount, which to some extent is a normal reaction to what was going on at that time. But obviously, yeah, there's a lot more to it than that. Okay. I'm not walking around so much, which is quite interesting. I don't know what I think my hands are walking around for me. So, Winter and Larvis 2021, as I say, I'm trying to get the most up-to-date information for you here, and thinking about impacts on child and young people's mental health. So the reason why I chose this research as such is that it actually looked at children and people's, mainly young people's really, things that they said on social media, which they say everything on social media, don't they? Like, you know, so everything is out there on social media. So it's a really good piece of research looking into young person's world. Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. So what that research showed was that mental health difficulties, as described on young people's social media, as arising from or exacerbated by, because these are the things that would have been most important to them, school closures, lost opportunities, going to university, you know, going to a new job. I mean, it breaks your heart, honestly. Or fraught family environments. What we know is the family environment at that time, fraught is probably an understatement for a lot of people's lives, yeah? Included, you know, we think about the impact on their mental health, depression, anxiety, very much so, and suicidality, sadly. And I think we are still stuck in a lot of that coming out of, you know, where we're at now. One of the sad facts is that, you know, I have been involved in 2 suicides of young men in the past year, you know, which is so sad. It's just incredibly, incredibly awful. But those sort of things are still happening as we come out of this pandemic. Sorry to share that sad reflection with you. Thinking about this from a different perspective, some young people, and again, this is interesting to think about, described improvements to their mental health, but this was away from prior stressors, such as school. And we think often, and it's described often, that school can be a safe place, can be a haven, can be a place where, you know, obviously we all go to school, children, people all go to school. For a lot of children and people, school is actually quite a stressful environment and a really hard place to be. So it's no surprise that actually some young people, well, hey, we don't have to go to school, we don't have to have all that stress. We just roll out of bed and get on Teams or whatever, yeah? So actually, the mental health improved. It makes sense, doesn't it, yeah? Young people also recounted anxiety at the ramifications on the virus on others. Obviously, what we have to remember is that a lot of people's parents, grandparents, relatives were affected by this, you know, in the first wave. You know, we think about, don't want to sit right back to there, but people were dying. It was, you know, horrendous and very quickly. So the impacts of the virus on others, you know, young people obviously felt that. And what we have to remember is that children and people were not affected in the main physically by COVID-19, but the mental health of children and people has been affected greatly. So the mismatch with the older age ranges, you know, us oldest, were affected physically also. Yeah. So sometimes that tends to get missed. So then I went into specifics, and just time here, and I was thinking about specific groups of children and people and how their mental health has been affected. So, and you'll read a lot of this in that what they found in the main, that children and people with pre-existing mental health difficulties were more affected, as you can probably imagine, than anybody else, you know, within that sort of children and people. So their conditions, as it says, have been exacerbated. So some of this is NHS surveys. So it will say this is February to March 2021, so we're in the sort of second year really of the pandemic. Children and people with a probable mental health disorder were more likely to say that lockdown had made their life much worse, and it splits it into age ranges though, than those unlikely to have a mental health disorder, and that's research from 2021. So that sort of, yeah, makes sense as such, and that's interesting to note. And I think if I look at my practice, have a practice reflection, then I would say that's definitely true. People that have, you know, been referred in for family work, within family work, in the main, they have had a pre-existing mental health difficulty, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic. I like this clip. The mental health and wellbeing of some groups are being disproportionately affected, and this is where I'm going specifics here as well. I know there's, you know, whole heap of writing on here, but there's a couple of surveys there by children's commissioners, and it splits it up into England and Wales, which is quite handy as we're on the border of Wales, and there might be some Welsh people here, I'm not sure. So I didn't actually think about that. That's just the way it happened, but it's fitted quite nicely. So the first thing there, 2020 research, a survey by a Children's Commissioner for England. Children whose parents were unemployed at the time of the survey were most likely to experience persistent stress. 29%, nearly 30% reported feeling stressed most days, compared to 22%, which you think is not a great detail, but that's still a huge amount, 30% nearly, to 22% of children in the general population. What we know of children and young people, and especially as I say, you know, my business, I work with relationships, is that children are often described as the barometer for the family, mental health, experience, stress. They will absorb, they will absorb the stress that is in that family. So if you've got parents who the virus, because of the virus effects and, you know, COVID-19's effects, are unemployed or on furlough, are, you know, maybe domestic violence happening, fraught relationships, etc., children will absorb, and we do go on to talk about domestic violence in a moment, absorb that stress. So that is why it will be coming out to say that they will experience persistent stress, because the factors of parents being unemployed, no money, etc., it's a huge stress in the family. So the second survey there, it's interesting there, and it tells you, a huge amount of children and young people there. This is Wales, January 2021, and it looks at certain groups. So disabled children and people more likely to be worried about coronavirus, more likely to feel sad, more likely to feel unsafe. And I was curious there when we're thinking about, obviously children and people with disabilities. The research that was out and that is still going on would be saying that sort of like people with pre-existing health conditions are more at risk. So the stress of sort of knowing that possibly that they may be more at risk of catching it, perhaps parental, obviously trying to protect children and people who were, with specific difficulties, exacerbated some of those feelings, because obviously parents are doing it from a caring position, but it was just also scary. So the thoughts about, the worry about coronavirus, more likely to feel sad, more likely to feel unsafe. Then we look at BAME, so Black, Asian, other minority ethnic groups, more likely to feel lonely, less likely to say they feel safe. Again, if we think about perhaps extended families, the role of, going to see people, friends, etc., those were just, you could not even go out. And it's interesting that, a reflection even, I saw, I think she's gone now, I don't know whether she's here, Kate Jones was in here earlier. Ah, Kate's there. And I was talking to Kate and I just suddenly realised I'd not seen Kate's legs. I've never seen kids because we've been on screen all the time. Like, you know, we've just been on screen. So, I mean, I know that's sort of, you know, but actually physically seeing people, physically connecting with people, that was just null and void. I can remember working in hospitals and obviously relatives phoning up literally constantly, like, you know, to speak with or find out what was going on because you could not visit. It was horrendous to even think about, isn't it? You know, I mean, buying iPads, the hospital I bought a load of iPads, like, you know, but then it was like getting a signal, getting it working, nurses trying to do care as well as get an iPad connected. It's so hard. So thinking back to children and people, you know, living in amongst all of that stress and strain and how isolated they feel also with not going to school. And again, this is a very interesting and sad reflection as well. Obviously, for some families, that fraughtness would escalate or could be around domestic violence as well. So children, young people were more exposed to this because they were locked down in their homes. Yeah. So this is a survey by Women's Aid 2020. 19 out of 31 women who were living with their abuser felt their abuse had worsened during lockdown. There was no escape. There was nowhere to go for the women, the children and the young people. In an earlier survey before that, 17 out of 32 mothers who were experiencing abuse reported their children had also witnessed more abuse towards them during the lockdown. 12 out of 32 said their abuse had shown an increase in abusive behaviour towards their children. I mean, that's an awful statistic. But literally we were, I mean, I know the reasons for it, but we were literally locking people in their homes with their abuser. It's just horrendous, isn't it? Switching it up and looking at a different section of the population, I sort of thought I have an interest, as was kindly mentioned in my introduction, in infant mental health. One of my previous roles, I worked with, I don't know whether you, I don't think you had worked, Family Nurse Partnership. I think you did have Family Nurse Partnership one time. I don't know whether it still exists here. But Family Nurse Partnership was, I was a family nurse working with teenage parents and their children. So I have a real interest in infant mental health. And infant mental health is, again, is about relationships between parents. It was young parents I was working with. My youngest parent she was 14, my oldest parent was 19, so that was in Coventry. So that was an interesting job. I could tell you all about that. But yeah, so I have a real interest in infant mental health. So when we're thinking about the impact, and again, remember, these are babies that were born during COVID. They know no difference. Like, you know, so the research is ongoing. I was having an interesting reflection about speech development just, you know, a minute ago with some of the babies and children that are growing up now. So when we look at the stats that were explained here, this is from the Parent Income Foundation 2020. Almost 7 in 10 expectant or new mothers found their ability to cope with their pregnancy or baby had been impacted. That goes without saying. There are some that would say, you know, in a way, it has increased the bond with them, you know, with their baby. So that's an interesting thing to think about as well. But when you don't know any different, you know, it's interesting to think about that. You know, there were no baby clubs going on. There were no meeting up. You couldn't even see your own mother, like, you know. So all of that was going on. Everybody's wearing masks, and I didn't think about all of that with, you know, babies. You know, everybody's wearing masks. It's just so interesting. So, and again, this research is ongoing. Nearly 7 in 10 felt the changes brought about by COVID-19 were affecting their unborn baby, and this is the impact of anxiety, yeah, and stress. Babies being perhaps crying more, tantrums more, becoming more clingy. This is felt most sharply amongst parents under 25, so new parents, younger parents, and those on the lowest income. So there's more stress within the household anyway. Yeah. 1/4, which is interesting from my perspective as well, of parents reported concern about their relationship with their baby. Having the baby, for those of us that, I mean, I had 4, like I had twins last time around. I mean, they're all sort of in their 20s now, like, you know, but even with my first and my twins, you know, it is a daunting experience. It's a massive change in your life. Like, you know, you will never experience anything like that. Even, you know, I got 2 and then I had 2 more kind of thing. And even that was like, oh my God, this is like such a life-changing thing. So to have a baby in the middle of all of that, hats off to you, because it must have been really, really hard. So yeah, but as I say, that research is ongoing as well. So now we turn to hopefully a more hopeful stage. We are in a different stage of the pandemic. Even though one of the interesting things, I did talk about COVID-19 the other day with some of my students at the university, and I was reflecting on this because one of my students said to me, "Oh, do we have to talk about that? Like, almost, do we have to talk about that?" And I said, almost like it's, COVID-19 overcome. So I sort of thought, okay. So if we think about, they're in the main working at schools or on placement within schools. So I said, if we think about perhaps absence at schools, children, people's anxiety, where do you think that stems from now? Is COVID still around, still having an impact? And she said, yes. So we still have to talk about it, even though you might want to, put it to bed, don't want to think about that anymore. So hopefulness, that's where I'm leading on to, and sort of recovery and resilience. I think that first bit here, is really something that we need to hold on to here, that our children, our young people have shown absolutely amazing resilience during this pandemic. We have never been through anything like this in our lifetime. So our children and people, and you guys, because I'm sure some of you were young people not that long ago, or still are, have shown incredible resilience. And there have been some positives in the changes in their circumstances. And I thought some of these stats might be interesting to share with you. I don't know whether you know this, but every year the Children's Society does this sort of child wellbeing survey. So that's really interesting if you want some up-to-date stats on some of your assignments or whatever. Every year they do this up-to-date survey about child's wellbeing or child happiness. So during 2021, you can see there that 10 to 17-year-olds in the UK gave themselves an average score of 7.7 out of 10 when asked how happy they were yesterday. I mean, yesterday might have been an amazing day, but I was surprised by that, 7.7. So the bounce back ability of children and people cannot be underestimated. There is still joy, there is still happiness out there, even though perhaps a lot of their lives have been taken up by what has been a horrendous time during the pandemic. And that's the other thing I was reflecting on, that again, I'm probably talking from my own perspective, but literally I can remember a time before this pandemic, some children, people are half their lives, nearly all of their lives affected by this. It's important that we remember that, because we might be able to remember 2010, whatever, but some people that is when they were born, that is the whole of their lives. So broadly in line with scores from previous years. So that is interesting to think about, that children, people were rating themselves as being as happy yesterday as in line with previous years. So that is hopeful. I don't think they've just suddenly forgot. I think it is a reflection of where we're at. Survey of UK 13 to 19-year-olds found that 32% of young people said relationships within family or household members had improved. So 32%, compared with 13% who said they got worse. So we do know that obviously, there are pockets where things have got worse, and we know the reasons for all the stresses behind that. But actually what's interesting is that 32% of young people said relationships had got better, had improved. So that's an interesting stat as well. And we think about, you have got to learn everything about everybody when you are locked down with them for weeks on end. All we could do once at a time was go for, do you remember that, a daily walk or something like, do you remember that? So literally that was the only thing that we could do. So so some people obviously had an improvement, got to know their family a little bit better, which is great. 54% said lockdown had a positive impact on spending time with members of their family or household. And I haven't put in there how many people got a dog or chickens or whatever, but I'm sure that made a difference as well. So where are we now? We're moving on towards recovery as such. And I think each of these aspects that I've done, reflections, recovery, resilience, could be a lecture on their own. Yeah, so please do bear in mind I've just done a snapshot of different things. If you want me to go back and do that, that's fine. But I've just tried to sort of put the things that I feel would be most useful to you. And I thought this was interesting. So this is research taken from the Centre for Social Justice, which I think, well, that sounds an interesting place to work. So when we look at, and I think I was homing in on where children and people might be at now, and I know, specialist camps, and I didn't want to take it right the way back to specialist camps because there is an increase of children and people coming to specialist NHS camps, but not everybody with mental health difficulties who are children and people needs and services appropriate for them. So not everybody. CAMS, NHS specialist CAMS, is not everything, okay? A lot of schools, communities, etc., are supporting children and people's mental health because children and people's mental health is everywhere. Yeah, it is everywhere. It is not just about NHS specialist CAMS at all. So that is the reason why I probably focused on schools, to give you more of a sort of on-the-ground perspective. So what we know is that the post-COVID school attendance has been a dramatic drop. And I think for anybody, work-wise, college-wise, university-wise, school-wise, the get back to normal as quick as possible has not been easy. Has not been easy at all. And I'm sure you could reflect back and think this. And I'm sure some people in the room might be thinking of their own children or children of people that they know that have found going back to school really difficult for various reasons. What we know is, children and people that are out of school, that are off, whether they are classed as NEET, not in education, employment, training, or whether they are just having, random repeated absences. And when you've got, parents working at home, it's quite easy sometimes for various reasons to think, okay, they're not very well, right, stay at home. And I think we have got into a bit of a mindset, some of us, but also it is very anxiety provoking for young people now going back into school for various reasons. So absence links to crime rates, lack of educational attainment. We know that, obviously the most affected are children, people in dire socioeconomic circumstances, disadvantaged pupils. They are at, the tier between, the high attainers and the lower attainers is rapidly growing, yeah, okay, so that's split. So they're much more vulnerable to exclusion as well. I think schools are really being as supportive as they can, in what they've got. I mean, remember, we've got all sorts of other things going on at the moment, haven't we? War in Ukraine, cost of living crisis, let alone this, so schools are trying to be as supportive to families as they can be. But it is, it's tough out there. So pupils with a diagnosed, and when I talk about diagnosed, I'm sort of, I suppose, talking about children, people that have probably came to diagnosis from CAMS, because that's where you gain a diagnosis. But we don't tend to diagnose, adult mental health tends to diagnose. We think much more holistically from a CAMS perspective. So to gain a diagnosis, you would have to be quite grueling. Pupils with a diagnosed social, emotional, mental health need made up 1 in 10 are all identified severely absent pupils. So these are those with really, really poor mental health, so going back to school was even harder. So these are some of my ramblings and reflections at the bottom here, and I felt that the focus for all of us within sort of universal settings as such needs to be on identifying, supporting pupils and their families with that return to education. I'm always looking for jobs for my students. I randomly look at, think about put it on their Facebook page and things like that. And I know a lot of our students have gone on to do family support work. So, that sort of role, that is increasing hugely now because obviously families need a lot of support at the moment. So family support work are working a lot with return to education with children and people, increasing that attendance engagement, because what we know is that helps with all sorts of stuff for the future, yeah, and their mental health. Systemic approach. So when we talk about systemic approach, that is what I work with. My training is in systemic psychotherapy. So it's very much thinking about, my old supervisor at CAMS would tell me it's all about, think about the layers of an onion. You've got the child in the middle, you've got the school, the community, the family, all around the outside. So all of those systems interact with each other. We are a part of that system. So when we're thinking about the child, we're very much thinking around the system around them, systemic approach, not the child in isolation. That's in a bit of a nutshell of systemic approach. School staff, universal settings would be supporting, as I say, children and people the best they can. There are a lot of roles out there within pastoral support. Obviously, there are forever vacancies in specialist services, and I think that is not just the case of CAMS, that is the case of the NHS, yeah? For those of you that will be qualifying in a few years' time, fingers crossed, with sort of nursing degrees, social work degrees, etc., if you wanted to go that way, there will be jobs, there'll be a jobs bounty, that, you know, the jobs are there. So it is, really interesting. I think the whole country will be involved in health and social care at some point in time, won't it? So the importance here is around, early identifying, early intervention. The other thing I thought, it's interesting to think about whether it's with our own children and people or whether it's with children and people that are engaged in whatever services you're in, is that normalising, discussing feelings. That is hugely important. It's okay to talk. It's okay to share. If I think back to some of the difficulties that I had with some young men, these were young men that had no history of mental health difficulties, or we didn't know had a history of mental health difficulties, and those are shocking instances. So we do have to think about how we normalise discussing feelings and emotions. That is hugely important with our children and people. There's a huge amount that we can do around staff mental health awareness. Obviously, I'm doing that with you now, but that is around making sure that mental health for children and people in particular is on the agenda all the time. And it's interesting, I do some work for, another thing I do some work for a school that's fairly local to here, and they do medicals. And I was thinking about this the other day, I was thinking they do medicals, but guess what? It's all about physical, isn't it? It's all about the blood pressure and your pulse and your this and that. Nothing is asked about mental health. So you just think, wow, where is it? We're still, failing in some ways to think about mental health, even though there's a huge amount. But screening-wise, all of that sort of thing, we need to be able to discuss mental health much more so with our children and people. The other thing which I will come on to as well is raising the importance of staff wellbeing. You are the receptacle. You are also the absorbers for children and people's mental health difficulties. So you are the biggest and best resource that your children and people will ever have. So guess what? You have to look after yourself. You have to think about your mental health and well-being. Yeah, and that also models to our children. We're looking after ourselves, and this is important. Yeah, whatever your thing may be to do that. This I thought was an interesting, I'm not going to go through all of this because I think we'll run out of time a little bit, so I'm going to sort of leave that for you. I don't know whether these experiences of COVID-19 from a recent study, learning environments, friendships and dealing with changes. Some of those being positive, some of those being a bit more negative as such. But when I think about dealing with change, relief to be back, but it's still a bit nerve-wracking. I hear that. Yeah, it is. Coping strategies. I think, when it said about screen breaks, I thought, well, that must have been when we were actually in lockdown, maybe, or, some people maybe still doing some screen breaks. But also that bit about we're all going through the same thing, normalising it, and we're all here for each other. That's lovely, isn't it? Sometimes I feel like I need to end there, but there isn't. So, KCL study, the week study. Again, this is ongoing. So this is King's College London, and I've put a link in there that you can look at. And again, I only took a little bit out of here. And this is sort of moving on to, okay, so what things help us to recover? And this is, you can read there, it's a policy briefing. There's lots of different information on there, highlights key discussions. But I think, and this is not just about teachers, this is about, if you look at that end bit there, this is about all of us, thinking about giving students, giving children and people time to process their experience with COVID. Something about what we would call in counselling and validations, affirmations, okay? Thinking about what you did well, we hear you. We're not always looking for solutions, The random things I buy. I sometimes see numerous little cards and things like, I mean, these are like well done. You know, this is about, now I just pick up random things. This one's it's a card about single parents. It's all costed things. It says, you know, actual superhero. I thought there's so many people that I'd like to send that to, me included. Love, respect, and unity. And I thought, you know, all of those things that, you know, just say really, really good, nice things. You know, to be kind, be nice. We have been through a really tough time, and we need to recognise that for each other. Resilience, I'm going to whistle through this a little bit. So this is a key to recovery. We all have resilience, and we are all in different stages, and it is a dynamic, ever-changing constant, okay? It is that bounce back ability. And if you think about the annual survey from the Children's Society, that's what we're looking at here, resilience, that bounce back ability. Oh, 7.7% said I'm happy yesterday. This is interesting for you to look at, and there is a reason why I've put dandelions on there. So there's different theories around resilience. Some of you may know a bit more about this than others. So I kind of summarised the two of them. And this one looks at the resilience theory according to somebody's temperament. So almost thinking about, is there a genetic component to resilience? Yeah. And theory will say that, you know, or reject the idea that resilience is solely genetic, yeah, or that there is innate and immutable trait. But the consensus is that the genetic component of resilience derives from innate differences in temperament. So that is, you know, and the way that this research splits it is into sort of using flowers, right? So dandelions would be hardy, resilient, robust, thriving in even adverse circumstances. You know, dandelions, they grow everywhere, yeah? Orchids, tender, more fragile, more vulnerable in adverse circumstances, easily damaged. And some of us will fit in various categories. And that might change from day to day as well. You know, it is a dynamic. Tulips fall into, you know, some of the categories above, between the categories. And what they found was that in 2018, 25 to 35% of children and adolescents scored as dandelions. That's interesting. About the same amount as orchids, okay? And you're probably imagining like, oh, my child's this, that child's this, like in your head, 41 to 47% of tulips. And it's not saying that one's worse, bad, better than the other. It's just a reflection of where temperament fits in. And as I say, that can change. So another, you know, theory to think about is obviously resilience theory being a sort of flux between the internal and the external environment. Turns away a bit from the sort of like genetic component, but leans into the idea of that flux and that relationship between the child's internal environment and the external, the family, the layers of the onion, remember, yeah? And Feldman, 2020, noted that resilient individuals are not only born, but critically raised. So that's the innate, inbuilt versus the external environment. Still with me? Okay? Yeah. That's a nice picture. Can it be developed or is it set? It can be built. It's not a set. It's not a set thing. Yeah. We know that we are born with our temperaments, and those might change depending on circumstances. But sometimes we are, you know, orchids or whichever. But actually, resilience can be built. So this is the way to build resilience with our children and people. That's what we want. And the important thing that I've highlighted, as you would expect from a family therapist or family systemic practitioner, you need one strong adult relationship. So it takes one strong adult relationship in a child, young person's life to build resilience. That can be anyone. If ever anybody's watched, there is a clip on YouTube about Ian Wright, who's a famous footballer, now pundit, meeting with his teacher from years ago. He came from a very abusive background. His mum and his stepdad, very abusive. And his teacher, his PE teacher, I mean, it makes me go, you know, goosebumps when I'm talking about it. And he met his teacher, really, you know, helped him sort of obviously turn into the guy that he became. They filmed a meeting with him and his teacher, sort of like, I mean, people are not even seeing it, you know, within the past few years. And the man dissolved, like, you know, he just absolutely sobbed meeting this Mr. Pigeon or something he was called. Such a heartwarming thing. But that's what I say, that one person to make that difference, and that's important that we all remember that. This is a load of information here, but I'm going to summarise it into when we're thinking about building resilience and the links with recovery, there are certain things that I think are really important. And what we're trying to instill in our children and people and help them feel is two things: sense of belonging, yeah, and empowerment. Yeah. So when we look at, I mean, that does come into Maslow. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's still going, yeah, it's still out there. But the third level in human development towards that self-actualization is actually that sense of belonging. Ties people together in relationships, families, communities. Really important to understand who we are, you know, the strength that we get from each other as such. Really necessary ingredient to resilience, and really think about that sense of belonging. A very important protective factor for children who've experienced multiple adversities as they have done through COVID. Key factors to build resilience. Interventions with BAME students have shown that increasing a sense of belonging encourages academic success, because that's what we want. We want you to be the best you can be as such, and get the best out of life that you can. Empowerment at the bottom there, that's, you know, the process of helping an individual or group gain control over their own dealings. It's building that, what we would call that self-efficacy, the belief that you can believe you can do it. Yeah, really important. When I worked in Family Nurse Partnership, we did a lot of work with young people who had always been told they can't, to introduce that I can, and I do believe that I can. You know, so all of those things build resilience. They'll take risks, try new things, speak up when they fail to understand something, push back when they find something uncomfortable. That's what we want for our children and people, to build that resilience. These things, which I thought were really interesting, because they do come from America. I've hidden some of the Americanisms, but I thought, oh, it's quite interesting to reflect on some of the things that we know and some of the things that we're doing here in the UK, because this is, you know, 2022 research, this is this year, but it is American, as I say, like, so I left it in there and I thought, okay, so I was reflecting back to what are we doing? Some things I think they are there, but they're not all there in every environment all the time. And these are the things that build resilience. I loved that, compassionate classrooms. Oh, that's such a lovely word. You know, those two words, compassionate classrooms. So you've got things in there about, you know, training. And that's where I think some of the resistance comes in, because some people do not know, they're not aware, they haven't had training, they feel overwhelmed. So that compassionate classroom, or that compassionate sense for the helpers, yeah? So you can read that bit about that top bit there. And that's an interesting second point there. I mean, I know it says recess, it's American, so obviously it's play. Mandatory minimum for outdoor play. I mean, in some schools and environments, you know, stopping children and people from playing is still used as a punishment. Not wrong. You can quote me on that, I don't care. So going on down, universal policies focused on building agency, self-efficacy, belonging. We know those help to grow resilience in our children and people. After school enrichment opportunities, and guess what I'd like to add to that? Free. No, you don't have to pay for them. Yes, you will all be exposed to music, art, for free, like, you know. I feel like I'm doing some kind of what is it, like a government thing there. Access to creative art programs, you know, you will have seen hugely, there's a few of them online as well, but, you know, access to art and the arts. I don't know whether, I mean, obviously you're next to an art college, so you can't get away from it, but, you know, those sort of things, different mindset, really sort of way to express and think about how to process feelings and how to think about things. That should be offered to everybody all the time for free, yeah? Funding for field trips, so children and young people from various different backgrounds are able to go on these things. Safe and clean outdoor play in all areas. Mandatory healthy school meals for free. Parent education. I mean, we still get a lot of, there are targeted pockets of parent education around mental health, children's feelings, emotional mental health, etc. But again, I think that should be universal. Not just, I mean, we all, I think some of us may have been to, like, you know, parent-baby classes after you've had a baby, and, you know, learn how to bath them, learn how to feed them, all that type of thing. Actually, we need to know about relationships, we need to know about mental health, we need to know about our own mental health, those sort of things. Fathers included within that, yeah? So those sort of things, I mean, yeah, parent education, access to consistent high quality healthcare and mentoring. There's nothing as good as sort of, you know, children and people, which I think they do in a lot of schools, but having a mentor, having a buddy that they can talk to, you know, about different things. And as I say, mental health, feelings being, you know, talked about in general, like, you know, not just as a sort of afterthought and in the corner somewhere. That's not come out very well, but I think what I was trying to do on that side, on the right-hand side as you're looking at it, is think about the mental health benefits of nature-based. You know, I know we had our COVID things about going for a walk every day and everything like that, but actually the benefits now of it's not just about medicalising mental health, it's about thinking about in terms of wellness and well-being. And there is nothing that's as good for well-being and wellness than going out and being in the outdoors, you know, forest bathing, all of those things, yoga, etc., all of those things that can be brought into different environments, but for free, not paying for them. There are different links on here that I'm not going to click on because I'll probably do something weird, but there are different links on there that will take you to further resources. Every Mind Matters, there's a huge amount on there about supporting our children, people and ourselves with our own mental health. Mind Ed, I don't know whether you've ever heard of Mind Ed. It's a really huge up-to-date e-learning portal. I think I've linked in there about sort of almost like there's a Mind Ed for families and there's a Mind Ed for professionals. So you can go on both, obviously, like, you know, but you can signpost people to whichever. But it's a free e-learning portal that you can get certificates from. It's, as I say, you can do it whenever. And it's got everything on there about children and people's mental health. It's really, really useful. And it's kept up to date, you know, it's not years old. I also found that was quite a gem on the bottom there, CAM resources. So on that, I mean, again, I haven't tried all of these links that are on that CAM resources page, but that has got a link for different signposting things about, there's podcasts, there's videos, there's websites, there's books, etc., etc. So that's a real minefield of all sorts of things on there for resources to help. Finally, I thought I'd end with that lovely picture. I'm going forest bathing. That lovely picture there, thinking about the importance of looking after us as whether we're carers, whether we're professionals. You know, you all want to work in the field of maybe children, people, but even if it's with adults as such, you know, we do need to look after ourselves. So I think working in partnership, because at some point in time, whether you work with adults, you will come across parents and carers, and we need to remember that we need to work in partnership with them. We're not dragging them along, we're working together, we're strength-based, we see their value, we see their strengths, we validate, we affirmations we offer, we build that empowerment and that belonging, non-judgmentally, yeah? Using our experience and our knowledge to support parents, because we need all the help we can get. I mean, I'm a parent, I still need help. Mentally Healthy Schools, the Anna Freud Centre, that again, I've put a link on there, that offers lots of support guidance, not just if you're in schools, it's elsewhere as well. And the importance there, it's interesting to see whether some of your schools are signed up or work in what we call a whole school approach, because the reason why I've sort of focused a little bit on schools is that's where children and people are in the main, and that's where they can make a difference as well. And that's really important to think about mentally healthy schools, normalising those feelings. Oh my gosh, right, how am I doing? Hey, not too bad. So I finished there, questions, reflections, thoughts. So I thought I can take some questions. My email address is on there. If there's anything that you think afterwards, I should ask things about that, whether it's about careers, courses, I don't know, anything you want to ask me you've forgotten, then please do just email me. But are there any questions that you want to ask me now? Or? Oh. I mean, I would like to say thank you all so much for attending. I hope that was what you expected to get. I should have done start. I hope this is what you expected to get. And I'm really happy to come and talk to you about anything. I've said to say you like me back, and I don't mind sharing my knowledge and expertise and experiences, that's fine. But I am really happy to see you all, so thank you.